Welcome back to Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm dear darling. I shall see what's going on a lovely island of Fawnhallow today in a late night episode. As is, usually the case, to be fair, was kind of busy with most of today, mind you. But yeah, so I was just checking my phone. What should we talk about today? Okay, but we have so many topics because I think it's fine we find time we finally talk about Patrick's Parabox, because I've been putting off talking about it for ages, and now I've finished 1,000 Times Resist. I should probably talk about this. So good evening everyone. Right now in Fawnhallow it's 11:59 PM on Saturday, November 15th, 2025. But I will say, had a very fun time celebrating a friend's birthday today, doing some very silly stuff, which I'll probably be talking about in future episodes. But yes, this is going to be the Patrick's Parabox talk about episode. If you're wondering, I'm not a professional reviewer or the thoughts off the top of my head. This is not me recreating Patrick's Parabox in Animal Crossing or anything like that. This is just me literally talking about a game, a random person, and it's my very, very subjective perspective on it. I actually think it's quite difficult to talk about Patrick's Parabox because there's not really too much for me to say regarding it. I think Patrick's Parabox is very much like my general view of it is that, did I like it? Yes, I like it a lot. And that's because it's a game which very much appeals to me. It's a puzzle game with very interesting mechanics. I'm not going to say Sokoban is my favourite genre puzzle game, but it's one I do enjoy a lot. See Baba Is You being my favourite puzzle game of all time. Patrick's Parabox plays around with some really interesting and fun concepts, and it's basically, weirdly enough, it's kind of what it says on the tin, and also not at the same time. What I mean by that is, like, you can understand what Patrick's Parabox is very quickly. If you watch a trailer, that is what Patrick's Parabox is. Just imagine it just like, not escalating mechanics is the wrong word, but introducing more and more mechanics as it goes on, and the interplay between them. It's, if you're familiar with puzzle games, it's very, like, direct. I'm not going to say straightforward because it's not an easy puzzle game, mind you, but it's very direct puzzle game. Like, it's exactly what you would expect. There's loads of levels, there's some very tricksy things, there's interesting mechanics, and there's plenty of levels which make you go, oh, I didn't even realise this mechanic could do that in that way. If you played a game, if you watch a trailer and you're like, I'm not entirely sure, like if you played like the first world or something, my hunch is you probably won't like the game. Like the game is not going to completely invert itself on its head. It's not going to completely redefine the genre of puzzle games. It just is a very, very well polished, well thought out and well crafted puzzle game. So if it appeals to you, it will appeal to you. If it doesn't, it's not going to. That's basically as direct as I can go with it. I guess I'll warn you before I do any. I think from here on out, normally I say I'll warn you before I do any spoilers. So from here on out, I'm going to say anything can be spoiled. There probably won't be there'll probably only be like mechanics spoiled. There probably won't be any solutions spoiled because it's quite difficult to remember them off the top of my head. But one thing I did really appreciate about Patrick's Parabox is every single level is so bite-sized. There are very, very few levels. I think only maybe when you get to like some of the conveyor belt levels towards the end, which feel like they take that long to do. Most Patrick Parabox levels feels like if you know the solution, you can do it in less than a minute. And that's something I appreciate a lot, is that there's very little tedium in the levels. And the second thing I appreciate is that it feels like there are very, very concrete rules in Patrick's Parabox, and I feel like they actually do a very good job at teaching you the rules, even subliminally. Like, basically, it's a thing, right? Which is taking advantage of puzzle games, that like you'll get mechanics and you'll get more mechanics which come together, but inevitably, because of the way that things cannot instantly resolve, one mechanic has to happen before another. And to be fair, a lot of games use this in a very interesting way. Like, there's this Baba Is You game, and there's a Baba Is You level, I can't remember which one it is, but it basically uses a prioritization mechanic where if you try and solve it in one way, it doesn't work. If you try and solve it using a slightly different order, it does work. But it's always been a bit murky and invisible, I think, in Baba Is You, because it's never really a central focus point. While in Patrick's Parabox, I actually feel like it is quite a big focus point. It's very important that the prioritization is understood, even, again, I say implicitly rather than explicitly, because it's a core concept for how things work. And what I mean by that, is there's a very simple mechanic of you can push a block. It's a soccer man game, after all. But there's also a mechanic where blocks can basically consume each other. Like, one block can be ingested by another block. But the pushing a block always comes first before as higher priority compared to eating a block, which makes all the levels work in a certain way, because then they'll be like, oh, otherwise if I eat a block first, then it would, like, your box could be in the middle of a room and you could eat the block. If you need to transport it, done, easy. But it does a pretty good job at introducing them, because it basically, every single world, this is why I think Patrick's Parabox is really good as like a sort of bite-sized puzzle game. It's sort of like everything is broken down very well into like every single world. Here's world 1, 2, 3, 4, each world, new mechanic, and then the first 4 levels or something will be like, here's how the mechanic works in the core concept. And then the next like 2 or 3 levels will be like, here's how the mechanic works with other mechanics or interesting things we thought of. And then the final 2 worlds will always be like, final 2 levels will always be like, here's like putting more things together. And then they'll be branched off. Challenge worlds would be like, here's an interesting, unusual mechanic, or unusual way to think about this mechanic. Like, there'll be a direct line through, which is like, tutorial, how does it interact? Here's like an expansion, like the test of it. And then the challenge levels always feel like a very separate thing, where they always, to me at least, feel like, oh, this is a very unusual, emergent mechanic, which has come from these 2 systems being like interposed with each other. Interposed is not the right word, but I'm pretty sure, but still. Like, intertwined, that's the one I want. Because interposed is like get in the way of, right? Place between, okay. So, Patrick's Parabox follows that formula to a T, world upon world upon world upon world, and that's not a bad thing, I think. As I say, it's a very highly crafted and well thought through puzzle game. Because there are so many times in this game where I looked at it and it was like, okay, I conceptually know what I need to do, I just can't figure out how to do it. Which is quite an inverse to a lot of other sort of puzzle games I played, and there's not necessarily one that's better than the other, but this one I think works better for me. Because the worlds are so small and simple, there's only so many blocks, there's very few red herrings, so you can look at a world and you can be like, okay, the obvious idea is I need to get this block there. What's the catch? I can't like go around the block or something like that, I don't know. As opposed to something like Cosmic Express, which is another puzzle game I played on this channel, which very much every single time I looked at a level was like, I have no concept of what I have to do to actually solve this level. And it's basically, that puzzle game is very trial and improvement. This one is very much, you have to logically work it out from start to finish. There's very few levels which I tried improvement my way through. There's quite a few levels which I got to like 1 step and then I sort of lucked through the rest of it. But I don't think there's a level where I did much trial and improvement. Okay, so that's it, sort of like the meta talk about Patrick's Parabox, which I think, again, it might not be your experience. It might not even be your experience if you love puzzle games, to be honest. That might be something where you're like, I don't really want that in a puzzle game, because it's not super exploration focused, like, compared to a lot of other puzzle games. Like, whereas exploration and, like, trying out different mechanics and that sort of thing, but it's not, like, to the level of, like, Witness or something, where it feels like you're really sort of like exploring and trying to figure out the rules as it goes on, or Barbara's You, where there's a lot of experimentation you can go. Because of a minimalist structure and size of all these levels, and the self-contained nature of these levels, it makes them sort of like very bite-sized pieces, which is delicious in one way, where you're like, oh, everything's self-contained, everything, I know what I'm dealing with. But at the same time, there's not too much exploration which goes on. I think the only times, like, not to say there's none, because exploration, like mental exploration, is an inherent part of puzzle games, but most of the exploration comes from when there's 2 mechanics which interact with each other in a weird way or an unexpected way. So your mileage may vary when it comes to that, to be honest. Otherwise, I think it's basically like a logician's sort of puzzle game is probably the way I'd put it. It's very consistent, it's very clear, and if the controls, again, very snappy. It's a very simplistic art style, which may or may not appeal to you, but I think is like, it does very well with it. It has nice sets of controls to be able to actually like go back and forth. Now, getting into the mechanics themselves are quite novel. Basically, it's a game where I think it is a Soccer Man game, but I think the thing that makes it most interesting is it has a sort of recursion element to it. Mainly that levels can contain themselves as an individual block, and interacting with a block can interact with a level. Interacting with a level can interact with a block. For example, if there's an open wall in the level, you could walk out the level and it would exit out the block. The levels basically go on infinitely stacking with itself, and from that it turns out there's a lot of really interesting mechanics and puzzles which come along. Like, there's like, of course, you can push a block. That's like the first mechanic that you have. And then you have a mechanic where like a block can eat another block, or you can step into another block, which very much sort of go hand in hand. Very, very cool as well. What else is next? Let me think. Patrick's Parabox. Well, I need to look at the worlds and figure out what is what. Then you get like different types of like subworld blocks, which like have open walls, which means it's just more difficult to push them. And then you have swap, which basically like flips blocks, and then center about like talking about the alignment of like different size subworlds, which is okay. But like some of these are like, oh, interesting mechanic, like completely new mechanic, like swap, which is being introduced. But then there's other worlds which are like, oh, this is us teaching you about the structure and rules of this game, like center, which tells you that you always exit and enter through the center of a block. Which is why I say I think the game does a very good job at teaching you the inherent rules. Like it feels like there's very few like worlds which are wasteful. There's like every world either teaches you about the rules or it challenges you to be like, do you understand the rules? And then you get to the world clone, which is my favorite world, or my favorite mechanic, because it's so interesting. Clone boxes are basically like self-referential blocks, but they're not the real thing. So like if you walk into a clone block, you'll actually walk into a real block, but it just gives you another way to do so without using a real box. That's what makes it so cool. Yeah. That gives a lot of interesting stuff, and like transfer and open are both like sort of like teaching worlds. Flip is the one I said as in flipping. Cycles is more like, to me, I think is like a interesting sort of like consequence of like the mechanics coming together. Player is a very novel one, I think. Because player allows you to possess blocks and sort of like move around who the player character is. I think. Play and possess, one of those two do that, and wall is basically the same thing. And then it gets to the next sort of level of interesting mechanics, I think, is when you get into the infinite ones, which is very endgame mechanic and really sort of messes with your head. But basically, very early on in the game, you can discover that you can create infinite paradoxes, which is basically if you get a self-referential level block, put it up against to the side of a level and open it up, you create an infinite paradox, because if you step out of a level, you'll infinitely be stepping out of a level, thus it becomes infinite. There's also infinitesimal the other way, where if you put a block up in a certain way and you walk into it, it would infinitely shrink you down into an infinitesimal size. And you get into the infinitesimal space, which you discover these early on. Well, at least I discovered them early on, and I was like, oh, that's kind of like weird. I guess it's just meant to be like, in my mind, I was like, this is a failsafe in case you create a paradox. But infinite exit, infinite enter, multi-infinite, these sort of things make it an actual puzzle mechanic where you need to make the infinite block, and then there's this infinite referential block which you'll walk out of or you'll interact with if you create an infinity. Same with infinitesimal. I would actually say the levels in this world are actually significantly easier than many of the previous ones. Like the hardest world I think might have been the clone or possess levels might have been some of the hardest ones, I think. It's hard for me to quite remember which ones I found the hardest, because there are a lot of levels in this game. It's like 300 and something. But the infinite ones I always think are very... And this is you could see it as a downside of Patrick's Paraboxes. There's about like 60% of the things is like you could solve by just basically being, what is the only thing I can do in this puzzle right now? Whereas like, well, you know, you look at, and it's especially true for the infinite ones, you'll look at it and you'll be like a 3 infinity block, and it's like, okay, well, I have to make a 2 infinity. And there's a 2 infinity, I had to take a 2 infinity to the side, there's only one open side, and I had to give a 1 infinity to that. Okay, well, there's only one way to do that. So it's basically sort of like, that's why I say there's like very little explanation. You just go from start to end, this is how you solve it, because there's only one thing I can do. That's what I mean. Which I don't think is necessarily bad for the game, because I think a lot of the levels as well are meant to be instructive in a way, but it does mean that there are some levels which are just like, they don't stick in your mind as much, you know? Which is a shame, because I think that's just a consequence of how it has to be to keep all of these blocks, like all of these levels like nice, compact and together. So yeah, then it's really interesting. And then there's like the challenge levels, which are pretty cool, to be honest. There's like a lot of very difficult levels in there, which, you know, use different like levels, mechanics, but like didn't make it into a final game for some reason. There's a lot of side worlds as well, where it's like there's interesting concepts which are only good enough to, instead of having their own world, basically get a subworld. My favorite one is definitely Friend, which basically there's copies of your blocks which move after you move, and you can do some really interesting stuff with that. But the post game actually has my genuinely favorite mechanic in the game, priority. It's my favorite. I should say it's not my favorite mechanic, maybe. It's my favorite experience in the game. But this is why, which really made me appreciate the way Patrick's Parabox teaches you even more, is the fact that Patrick's Parabox, as I said, has taught you very well, subconsciously, how the priority system works in the game. Like, very subconsciously, you pick it up by their slow introduction to new mechanics and testing you, making sure you understand, and then challenging you on the mechanic. So very implicitly, you understand that when you push a block, you know if it's going to move, if it's going to eat something, if you're going to walk into it, if you're going to possess it, something like that. Because like the priority goes like push first, then it's... Is it eat or step? I think it's enter, then eat, then possess, or something like that. I can't remember what other mechanics there are. But the first appendix level is called Priority, and it is my this should have been part of a real game, in my opinion. I can see why it isn't, but it really should have been like, I think it should have been like the final. No, okay, I kind of go back on that. Like, it should have been a secret world. It should be a secret world as it is currently, because it doesn't make sense in a real game, but it's such a cool concept. Well, basically, Priority is all these levels in this world reverse the order of priority, i.e., instead of it going push, enter, eat, possess, it now goes possess, eats, enter, push, which gives the beautiful, very, very difficult consequence that pushing a block is now one of the hardest things to do. Because you will just enter it randomly, and it gets you to basically, I've never had this experience in a puzzle game before, where it goes, you've mastered this game now, you've got to the end, you did everything, I'm going to invert everything on its head, show me you understand this game well enough that you can still solve these puzzles. Because you're not building up from nothing, you're just basically unlearning all your muscle memory. And it reminds me of like that Veritasium video of that guy who's like learning, trying to how to ride a bike or something, but he's reversed the direction of a handlebars going. That's kind of what it feels like, where you just have this inherent muscle memory of like, oh, I walk into this block, it'll push it, and then you step into it and go like, oh yes, the priority's reversed, duh. And it's such a cool experience, I think, playing through that level. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Definitely, if you like puzzle games and like soccer band games, almost worth playing that entire game just to get that experience of the appendix. For me, personally. Maybe not for you, but for me. That's what made it so genuinely cool, IMO. Anyway. That's Patrick's Parabox. I don't know what else to say about it. Its music was fine. Its graphics were, music and graphics both good to get the job done, but probably not something which I remember too fully off the top of my head. Just the puzzle design is super cool, in my opinion. Apparently there's also like a modding scene. I know you can make custom levels for it, so I guess the fun never stops if you really enjoy those sort of levels. I'm trying to think what else I want to say about it. I don't know, it's just like a very polished puzzle game experience. So if you like puzzle games, just play it, There's nothing else to say about it. If you like puzzle games, you'll probably like this game. I can't imagine another game. But there must be very specific things you like about puzzle games if you play it and don't like it, in my opinion. I don't know what else to say. I think it just does one of the best jobs of slowly, gradually building things up to it. And, of course, every level being so bite-sized means it's completely digestible. You can skip around to different levels as you see fit. You don't need to solve all the levels in a world to move on. You just need to solve enough of them. So, yeah, that is what I'd say. It's a fantastically delicious puzzle game. And yeah, very, very accessible. Would I recommend it if you don't like puzzle games? No. If I recommend it if you are interested in puzzle games, actually, maybe. I think it will be probably, if you're not used to puzzle games, I think you'll find it quite difficult. But I think it actually is quite accessible because it, as I said, it does one of the best jobs, I think, of teaching you its own mechanics. Like, it builds up so well. Like, this is a rare thing which very rarely gets complimented in the game because it's hard to notice. Its difficulty curve is really, really good in this game. It actually feels like a genuinely good incremental one. As I say, the only hiccup with that is that I think the infinite levels are probably too easy. But I understand why they're at the end, because it only makes sense to put them at the end. But maybe I'm also misremembering. Maybe they're harder than I thought. I don't know. Again, every level is so bite-sized that you, even if you're stuck on a level, it's fantastic because the moment... The most annoying part of a game is when, a puzzle game, is when you've figured out what to do, but you have to put in effort to solve it. You know, that time spent from basically going, what is the time from I solved a puzzle to I finished the puzzle? Like, I know the solution to I solve a puzzle. If that is too long, that is frustrating. But in Patrick's Parabox, it's almost never been more than like a couple, like at most a minute away, because of how small and bite-sized the levels are. So yeah, I don't know, that's what I'd say. Patrick's Parabox would recommend in general. But if you don't like puzzle games, probably give it a miss. If you do like puzzle games, give it a shot. Anyway, I'm going to round this episode off here. So if you have been watching, thank you very much. This has been Animal Crossing New Horizons. I've been Dear Darling. Likes, comments, subscription, shares, greatly appreciated. Socials, Discord down below. Hope to see each other again, but for now, it's our farewell. So until next time, bye-bye for now.